that was needed. At last, we reached the day when the Saturn V rocket was first rolled out of the vehicle assembly building on its way to the launch pad. The timing of the crew rotation was just right for Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and me to be chosen as the crew for this historic mission. And so on July 16th, 1969, our launch day finally arrived. We took the elevator up the gantry where the 360-foot tall Saturn V rocket stood magnificently as the countdown progressed. Due to the seating order, Neil on the left, Mike on the right, and I was in the center. And while Neil and Mike took the elevator on up to the White Room, the top of the gantry to enter the spacecraft, I stood 2 flights down, alone, holding onto my air conditioning unit, and I could see the sunrise over the waves of Cocoa Beach, Florida. And I thought back to how wonderful my life had been up to that point, and the many things that had worked out along the way to put me in the right place at the right time. At 9:32, the engines ignited and roared with over 7 million pounds of thrust to lift 3,000 tons of spacecraft fuel, equipment, and 3 guys. As we cleared the gantry and rocketed skyward, we were pushed into our seats by the rapid acceleration of the rocket, and it increased to G-forces. Within 3 minutes, we were 45 miles high, now experiencing about 4 Gs, 4 gravities, and traveling at nearly 6,500 miles an hour. A minute later, we passed the 62-mile boundary, 100 kilometers, where the blue sky gradually turns to the blackness of space. By 12 minutes after launch, we were traveling at over 17,000 miles an hour, the speed required for us to stay in orbit. For 3 hours, we orbited our home as we ran through the checklists, ensured everything was working along with mission control. Then we lit up and fired the engine that accelerated us now to 25,000 miles an hour on a trajectory toward the moon. Hopefully, when we got close, the moon would be there. You see a figure 8, that's not really what happens relative to the moon. You're going this way with an outward velocity, and the moon turns you back into an inward velocity. If you slow down, you're in orbit. On the 8th day round-trip journey, the 3 of us lived in a space capsule. We didn't like the word capsule, spacecraft, about the size of a standard automobile. Volkswagen automobile. On day 3, we fired our engine to slow us down enough for the moon's gravity to capture us and put us into lunar orbit. Another engine burn put us in the right orbit to be able to initiate on the front side the powered descent. Now the 3 of us had estimated about a 60% chance of successfully landing, because you can abort at many times before that. But we felt that we had a 95% chance of returning home safely. We landed 6 out of 7 times. That's pretty close to that 60%. But returning home was the part that we kind of appreciated, the 95%. 13 orbits of the moon later, on the morning of Sunday, July 20th, 1969, Neil and I entered the lunar landing craft that we had named the Eagle. We separated from the command module Columbia, where Mike Collins remained, and we piloted our powered descent to the moon's Sea of Tranquility. This was the most complicated, critical aspect of the whole mission. Landing was the hard part. Without landing, you can't walk around on the moon. Without landing, you can't go back again and land. As we descended, we saw that our landing site was kind of a crater with a lot of boulders. And so Neil began to maneuver the spacecraft beyond that area to get a safe, smooth spot. This takes a little longer and expends a little bit more fuel. So when we landed, it was estimated that we had about 15 seconds of fuel left. So after 11 intense minutes, Neil spoke the words, "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." There's been much discussion. That's not where we landed. You wouldn't want to land there. There's been much discussion over the last 40 years about why Neil was the first to step on the surface. It could be because he was a mission commander. And in our armed services, leaders are always at the front of their men. It could also be because he was closer to the door. But I'll never tell which one it was. So, with Neil already on the surface and taking photographs, it was my turn to back out and get to the ladder and start going out. But I sort of remembered what the checklist said, so I said, I'm going to partially close the hatch. Be careful not to lock it on my way out. There wasn't a handle on the outside. So as I stepped onto the talcum powder-like lunar dust, the first words that came to my mind were not beautiful, were magnificent desolation. It was a magnificent achievement, accomplishment for man to set foot on another world for the first time. And yet there was the desolation of the million-year lunar landscape that hadn't changed. No sign of life, no atmosphere, total blackness beyond the sunlit terrain. We spent a total of 2.5 hours on the surface collecting rocks, setting up experiments, taking photographs. In this experiment, we were not supposed to walk in front between the sun and the collectors because you might interrupt the electricity. Now you see those footprints over there? Those are my that's what you might call condemning evidence. So I'm interested in people going up there and brushing those away. Now, this is the photograph that Neil took of me, known as the visor photo, because you can see the reflection of the Eagle spacecraft and Neil Armstrong in the visor and other things. And people have asked me why this photograph is so great. It was spontaneous. Neil just said, "Hey, stop, look this way." I have 3 words why this is important. Location, location, location. We planted the first American flag on the moon, and this salute was my proudest moment. I always thought our flag looked the best of the 6 flags that had been planted there by December 1972. Finally, it was time for us to leave the surface and get ready to leave the moon. Now, I knew that Mission Control was going to say this. Apollo 11, you're cleared for liftoff. I couldn't resist. Roger, we're number 1 on the runway. There wasn't anyone else up there, and there certainly wasn't any runway. But it did sort of lighten things up at that crucial time of liftoff. Nearly 1 billion people all over the world watched and listened as we ventured onto the lunar surface. Houston Mission Control was in constant communication with us, even though we were further away than any 2 humans had ever been and what we had to do to get back home. But we felt connected to home. The commemorative plaque that we left on the lunar surface said, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969. We came in peace for all mankind." And I really think that that summarizes all of our efforts internationally to go there in peace, not just for us, but for all mankind. Since our splashdown in the Pacific Ocean, I've come to realize that more than the rocks that we brought back, the experiments we left, the true value of Apollo is the amazing story of innovation and teamwork that went into overcoming all the obstacles to reach the moon. That effort was driven in part by competition, in part by scientific discovery. Everyone on Earth sort of felt like they had participated in this incredible journey as we landed and walked on another celestial body for the first time in the history of mankind. And that feeling of participation brought together humanity. And that holds a value beyond measure. The world welcomed us back as heroes from the moon. However, I understood that people were not cheering for 3 guys, but for what we represented. That by coming together, we, as a country and as a world, had accomplished the impossible. After the fanfare died down and life returned to normal, I began to realize what was actually harder for me than going to the moon was returning to Earth. And that was the title of my first autobiography. I had reached the pinnacle of the moon, but I didn't anticipate the public notoriety. With the end of the Apollo program, I resumed my Air Force career, first astronaut to do that, and served a brief term as commandant of the, not Air Force Academy, but the test pilot school. Not exactly what I was looking for. But they didn't really seem to know what to do with a pilot who walked on the moon. I tried to help NASA regain momentum and develop more human space missions, but gradually public devotion to the space program waned. With NASA and the Air Force behind me, I felt myself in a lifestyle marked by a few celebrity engagements, but without structure. And in the process, I fell into depression, and that led to drinking. As the onset of